I chose to write this without making it an official biography and arranging any official interviews with her. She may not love everything that's in the book. I tackle some difficult aspects of her art and work and life, and I needed the space afforded me by not having her in my ear directly in order to write more honestly, I think, in the book. I'm not going to lie, it would be lovely if she liked it, but I just can't have that in my mind.
The title of the book is Traveling: On the Path of Joni Mitchell, and it was written by my guest, Dan Powers. It may not be an authorized biography, but it is a fascinating read. Whether you're a Joni obsessive or just someone who loves music and wants a deeper appreciation for the craft and the genius it takes to create enduring classic songs and albums that span decades. Anne worked on this book for 8 years on and off. All the while, she continued her work as a critic and correspondent for National Public Radio and also as a mom. She lives right here in Inglewood, writes about music for a living, and is never far from her local record store, where she let us tag along for a visit.
Well, here we are at our local neighborhood beloved record store, Grimey's, and I just live blocks from here, so it's so beautiful to have this in the neighborhood. And we're going to go see what they got in the way of Joni Mitchell records.
Hi.
Hey guys.
How are you? Hi. My name's Anna, and I'm the manager of Grimey's Records here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm excited to read your Joni book. Honestly, Joni Mitchell was always an artist that's sort of hovering around in the universe that I was exposed to as a child based on my parents' record collection and my mom's likes. But it wasn't really until the pandemic kind of that I discovered that I really wanted to spend a lot of time listening to Joni Mitchell records. So I've never delved into her life story, her history, other than just the very peripheral things we've seen now as she's at a kind of a bit of a revival, performing again, hanging out with her bestie, Brandy Carlisle. So feel like I'd really like to go back in and learn, and now so I have an exciting book on my summer reading list.
Well, shall we go look at the Joni records?
Yeah, let's do it.
My Morning Jacket, Mitski, so we're almost there. Where is Joni Mitchell? Do they have any? Wait, they are completely sold out of Joni Mitchell records here, which just speaks to the Joni Mitchell renaissance that is going on. Grimey's has a great little stage in here, so if Joni ever wanted to do a little in-store.
Oh man.
I mean,
we would be so honored to have the Queen here. We had Randy.
I'm Demetria Kaladimos. It's Banner and Company. Your approach is so unique, but the subject is so huge.
yes, it is.
I was thinking this is
Overwhelming.
like looking at every brush stroke in the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, yes, well said. She would agree.
I think she would. I mean, that is a mammoth project.
Yes, and that's why it took me, 8 years or whatever it took me. It was a lot of living with her and deep diving into every moment, every era of her life, and talking to people and doing all that archival research. I did a bunch of research here at Country Music Hall of Fame just because they had full archives of certain magazines I needed to look at.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was a lot. But I think I had to figure out how to structure the book in such a way that I freed myself from the necessity of chronicling every single second. I tried not to do it. The book is chronological, and that way it's a conventional biography. But I didn't want that at 2 p.m. on April 15th, 1967. She did this. I didn't want to tie myself to that.
Yeah. It's funny, that's how the bluegrassers talk about Bill Monroe. Have you ever heard
No.
some of these people go, I remember when Bill Monroe scratched his face one time. Literally, that's I've heard people talk that way.
I believe it.
What was the best early nugget you got about Joni that seemed to explain things or enhance your understanding?
Well, trying to understand her childhood and growing up in Saskatchewan, I came to realize that while she was a prairie girl, as she likes to say, and sort of a small town country girl, she was also a suburban kid, and looking at
They were not poor.
they were not poor. You know, I'm sure they had their struggles, but and where they lived, it's just like she was always gravitating toward turning her face toward the city. Even as a child, I think she loved nature, and we hear that in all of her songs as well. And she loved to be out in the fields, gazing at clouds or whatever. But she also was always interested in moving on to the next town and wanted to explore city life. So learning about her high school years and the kind of baby bohemian she was then really made me understand how she lit her own fire and like the drive that developed to become the artist she became.
Did she have idols or role models, or was she just...
Oh yeah, she admired Picasso, Mozart, Beethoven. I mean, I think when she started in music, also she did look to people. She did look to people that she would now probably say, well, I never considered them an idol, but Buffy St. Marie, Joan Baez, her very early recordings, you can hear a lot of the influence of Joan Baez, which is very expected since Joan was a huge artist at that time.
Sure.
And also then, Leonard Cohen was an early lover, mentor, influence on her as well in those early years.
I'm glad you brought up that relationship and many others in the book.
Yeah.
When you're hearing about someone being involved with someone in a romantic way, does that color the information you get that comes out of that relationship? Because they know the person in a different way.
Well, that's definitely true. They do. There's an intimacy level, but here's my main insight into that.
Okay.
I think Joni's personal history of relationships with men, is really most revelatory about her absolute immersion into her creative life and her music making career, because she really, with maybe one or two exceptions, only ever dated musicians, and I think that's because she was so focused on constantly challenging herself, constantly trying to learn new things as a musician, constantly just making music, and so to me, it's not. The gossip part doesn't really interest me as much as just the creative connections she had with these guys and what she learned from each of them and what they learned from her, which was everything.
Everything. Yeah, the male-female thing, too, there had to be an inherent sort of competitiveness. If you might not call it that, but it was probably in the air.
Well, yeah, I mean, I write about it in throughout the book, but in this chapter, The Boys, I talk about how she... kind of learned how to be one of the boys, how to stand on her own next to these men. And it's not about, when I write in the book, she could hold her own. I'm not saying she was not as talented as they were or even their peer. I mean, they all acknowledged that she was beyond them. She was more talented than them, more naturally gifted. But I was trying to illuminate this homosocial environment where women were generally really marginalized, and especially any woman that was associated with the family or the domestic sphere was kind of shut out. So Joni's ability to move in those circles was extraordinary, and was one reason why she became so successful and became kind of the chosen one. That dual role of mother and artist, or mother and writer in my case, is one that did cause so many complications for so many women. And Joni entrusted her daughter in adoption when she was 21, and that was a huge loss and a huge, incredible sacrifice really on her part. And I want to recognize it as such. But at the same time, it allowed her, as a woman who wasn't raising a child in Laurel Canyon, to hold a different status than, say, even Carole King, who really compartmentalized very well, but had two daughters she was raising, or Cass Elliot, who had her daughter Owen, or so many women in that scene. I talked to Leah Kunkel, who's a wonderful singer-songwriter, not as well known, and how for her, like, making those choices between her art and her mothering were very difficult, and possibly did stand as a roadblock for, for her ascent to fame anyway.
Do you think, can you point to a male artist that you think Joni directly influenced?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, David Crosby, all these guys, I talked to David Crosby, James Taylor, Graham Nash.
And were they
Tom Rush.
were they eager to talk to you about Joni?
I mean, at this point, and obviously David Crosby has left us now,
Right.
R.I.P., but at this point, I think they all not only recognize Joni's genius, but are eager to share their admiration. They know, with the hindsight of history, that to not do so would be a horrible misstep that no one would accept. But also, that said, all these men were very thoughtful and had specific ways they talked about her genius. David Crosby talked about, her skill at harmony and her incredible guitar style. And, it was funny when I interviewed Crosby, he was playing at the tiny desk at the NPR mothership, and with his then band, the Lighthouse Band. There were two women in that band. And he said in our interview, I didn't realize back in the day I could have a woman in my band. And wow, I really regret it. I'm like, yeah, because that woman could have been Joni Mitchell. You are an idiot. But he admitted it.
So there's so much work that went into this.
Yes.
Did you set it aside and do other stuff? And how long a period of time would you put it aside and then revisit?
I did, because I was, my day job, at NPR Music, I have a lot of responsibilities there. And one really important project that was concurrent with the writing of this book is Turning the Tables, which was a project that I co-founded with Joel Sternheimer of Lincoln Center to recenter the canon on marginalized voices, women's voices, especially non-binary artists, trans artists' voices. And we did that whole project while I was working on this book. They're complementary, and I should say we have actually an anthology coming out in October from that project. It's called How Women Made Music, A Revolutionary History, edited by Alison Fensterstock. So it's amazing to have both of these projects come to fruition the same moment.
That's great. Of course, the title, has a lot of meaning, but it also structures the journey of the book. I mean, that was kind of a gift in a way. It gave you a structure to think about.
Absolutely. And that was somewhat late in the game.
Really?
I mean, not the structure.
See, I would have thought that would have come at the beginning. This is how I'm going to do it.
The title itself. For a long time, I had the title in my mind, Approaching Joni Mitchell, which is kind of a dry title, but that's how I felt. That's what I felt I was doing, like constantly approaching her as a subject and approaching her from a different angle, from a different perspective. But then, I don't know. How do titles come to you? It's so funny. It's just one day you're listening to Blue for the 18 millionth time and you're like, oh, wait, in the first song she says, traveling, looking for something, what can it be? Oh, I hate you some, I love you some. Maybe that could be your title. And I wanted the official title to be All Four Travelings, but I'm very happy that the graphic designer for the book managed to put them all on there. So that song, All I Want, echoes through your head when you pick it up.
Yeah, I loved it. The last thing I want to do is spoil anything, but could you read this little section I have flagged on page 400?
There's no spoiling this
Okay,
book because
good.
we all know what Joni's life is. It's never easy to watch the heroes of our youth grow old. Not only does their aging put the ultimate loss, that is mortality, clearly in sight, the process itself is a series of little murders. The ideals embodied by the young and those in the prime of life, quickness and nerve, the magnificent aplomb that grows with each accomplishment, grow shaky as the body gives in. I hadn't been besotted with Joni in my own callow years, but I'd come to treasure the 25-year-old who had lugged her guitar through Colorado Canyon, and the 32-year-old who commandeered the open road, and the 48-year-old who raised her arms in love and wisdom even after many struggles and said, "Come in from the cold." Every one of those Jonies was her own person above all else. She welcomed acclaim at every stage, but mostly she wanted to keep heading somewhere else, never to rest at the front of a receiving line, and to never let others define her, even in adoration. Even though I knew from those spending time with her that she still ran her own show as best she could, the new soft face she was showing the world disconcerted me.
That spoke to me so much as a person my age.
Exactly.
That there isn't, especially with a creative person, there is more to the path.
No, absolutely. And what I'm expressing in that section is my kind of mixed feelings about my joy at her comeback, but my mixed feelings in that she is a different Joni now.
Yeah.
I'm sure your listeners know she suffered an aneurysm in the mid-2010s, and she's worked back from that. And it's an incredible story of healing, amazing, and healing through music with the help of her friends, and foremost Brandi Carlile, who's helped her so much. And it's been amazing to watch. But yeah, sure, sometimes when I'm watching this current Joni, all of her recent appearances, I'm like, man, I just want that prickly Joni to say something, or to, I don't know. It's very unfair to say this, but I'd love to hear the acrobatic notes of her youth when she could hit those high notes. But I'll say this also for her. Her musical intelligence is so strong that she's figured out how to bring that nuance into
a new range. Yeah.
And that's incredible. Even just the timing that she uses in delivering songs now, it's still genius.
It's Banner and Company. We'll be right back. I am trying to picture the earliest Anne consuming music. Okay, so what's the first record you bought, and in what form? Was it cassette, 45, LP? What was it?
I have a very vivid memory of buying two records. Although I say it's vivid, I can't exactly remember where I would have bought these records, but it must have been at a Woolworth's or something like that. The 1970 equivalent, 1974, 5, 6 equivalent of a Target today. I went with my mom. It's probably a Sears, actually. Mm-hmm. I went with my mom, and she let me buy these records, and I bought an Osmonds record and a Jackson 5 record. So, I was a little teeny bopper, but even then I was sort of dividing it up, and I was interested in R&B and rock, I guess. Not that the Osmonds are the epitome of rock, but I liked the boy bands then, and hey, I like them now.
And I was always a Jackson 5 girl because Chicago
absolutely.
Was very close to Gary. And,
yeah.
And we had a lot of great R&B in Chicago. So let's go further with that. Describe your room and your wardrobe.
I love that we're jumping right off into these memories. Well, when I was a little kid and started listening to music, I was in a room in our basement that wasn't originally supposed to be a bedroom, but when my brother came along somewhat unexpectedly 5 years after me, that became my bedroom. And there we had this really wild setup. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but somehow my dad wired speakers that would go from the stereo upstairs to the basement room, which was supposed to be a den. But so I would sit there in my little basement room listening to what they had, because at the time I didn't have that many records, right? So they had a lot of sort of musical comedy records, and they had a collection that Reader's Digest had put out called $1 Million Memories, and I would have my Barbie dolls sing to each other. And I remember having my fake Ken, because I don't think I had a Ken, but there was a a Barbie with short hair that became my Ken, whatever, that would sing "If Ever I Would Leave You" from Camelot to my Barbie. So,
And I know this is Seattle, right?
yes, Seattle, yes, yeah.
And what were there a lot of radio stations too, or was your thing recorded
Oh,
sound?
no. I was totally into radio. And by the time I started getting into radio, I think I was getting interested in rock. So FM radio, obviously, late 70s, KISW. See, if anyone could see, I'm making the metal horns with my hands. KZOK, these were the rock stations. So album-oriented rock. And then when I got a little older, we had a station called KJET that was a modern rock station that I loved, and that had all the new wave bands that I loved, but also college radio. College radio was huge for me. I didn't work in college radio, but when I was first at University of Washington, I went there for a couple years before I moved to San Francisco. I worked at the daily newspaper, the school newspaper, and the college radio station was upstairs in the on the top floor of the journalism building. So we had kind of a pipeline going up and down. The kid journalists and the kid DJs, we were all connected to each other. At that time, that station was called KCMU, but now it has become KEXP, one of the leading independent music stations in the country.
Why not the DJ route?
Well, I was always a writer, and I always wanted to be a writer. Even I remember in grade school being asked to make some kind of like collage picture of what I aspired to be, in 8th grade at Catholic school. We were graduating. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I made a picture that was all these newspaper headlines. And I remember I wrote, "The people must know," as if I was going to become a political writer or something. It was kind of silly. But I always wanted to be a writer, so I knew that's where I needed to end up. In some ways, I regret never exploring the college DJ route, especially since I ended up at NPR. I mean, I really wish I'd honed those radio skills then, but I seem to have figured it out in the past few years.
I think you have. I know you worked at a Tower Records.
I did.
And we had one here in Nashville, and I spent every Saturday there with the yellow and red bags.
Oh,
I mean, it was such
wow.
a gathering place. Was yours the same?
I never knew there was one in
Oh,
Nashville.
yeah, right there on West End. I'm trying to
my
figure out what,
gosh.
across from Vanderbilt.
Oh, well, yeah, Tower was my unofficial university, basically. I graduated from San Francisco State University, but when I left, first when I was in high school, my best friend and I would always go to the Tower Records down in the Seattle Center area, in that area of town, and I would just buy whatever was cheapest, honestly. But there was a kind clerk there who made us feel that we were legitimate music fans, even though we were like 15-year-old girls, not necessarily the kinds of people who the more indie, cool record store clerks were friendly to. He was friendly to us, and so I learned a lot just picking records out myself, and he would suggest things. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I started working at Tower almost immediately upon moving there. I was 19, and I was just immersed in this world. And it was the store, because as you remember, Tower was what they call a deep catalog store. So it had every kind of music, from great classical section, jazz, obviously pop, rock, but also global music, reggae, blues, all kinds of stuff. So it really was a place where I could explore a lot of music, just playing it in the store or buying things at my employee discount.
I'm wondering, are you a player, or do you have to be a player or a creator to do what you do with music?
I don't think you have to know how to play an instrument. But I did grow up playing music. I studied classical guitar as a young person, and I always sang in choirs. So I can read music. I would say my skills are fairly elementary, but I think it helps to have some knowledge of music making. I think I used to not think that, but I think the more time have spent, the decades I've spent doing this, I've realized that allows you to communicate differently with musicians and understand what they really care about. Because, when we talk to musicians, we expect them to talk to us about everything, politics, philosophy, their private lives, poetics. But what they really care about is gear and chord structures and rhythm. And so if you can talk on that level, it's very helpful.
I'm curious how you listen today in like long, thoughtful sessions or dribs and drabs and in the car and passing. I mean, how do you do that?
I love these questions. They're unlike any other that anyone's asked. So thank
Good,
you.
thank you.
I listen in different ways. I will say that I think my attention has been challenged. My attention span has been challenged by streaming music and by the advent of streaming and the convenience of the algorithms and the automatic shuffle that a lot of these platforms use, where you'll be listening to a record and suddenly it's another record. That's very frustrating. But I do spend time immersing if I'm writing about something, of course. I like to listen when I'm moving, though. I like to be cooking or walking or driving or something. So sometimes I'll just go drive around aimlessly so I can listen to music.
So your NPR moment is listening to music in your driveway.
Sometimes, yes, it is.
My guest is music writer and critic Ann Powers. We'll be right back. I listened to an interview where you were talking about, your early days and how you almost used your reporter's notebook as a prop.
Yeah,
so
as
as not to be mistaken for a groupie.
Yes,
right?
yes, definitely.
That could only happen to a girl, though.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I had to devise a reason for myself to be in those rooms. And I loved writing and felt compelled to write, but it also definitely was utilitarian on some level. As a young woman, it was always assumed that you were there to hook up with somebody in the band. Even many years into my career, I would still get that from people, and I know that's true for so many women music writers. It's unfortunate, but it is true even today, I think.
Such a dream job.
Yes.
Did you always think it was going to work?
I don't know. I stumbled along for many years. I definitely had my doubts about music writing as a legitimate path, and I don't even think I thought of it as a career when I was younger. I just didn't necessarily believe music writing was as important, quote unquote, or meaningful or rich as.
But wasn't that what you were reading?
Well, I was reading music writing, but I also was very interested in poetry. I got my undergrad degree in creative writing and poetry. I got a master's from Berkeley in American literature. So I think, like so many people, I privileged fiction, poetry, even literary nonfiction above music writing. Only as I kind of grew up and read great writers like Greil Marcus and Ellen Willis and Nelson George, did I realize, Greg Tate, did I realize, oh, wait, I am doing literary nonfiction. That is what I'm doing. And definitely working at the Village Voice was a huge part of that, because I was lucky enough to work there in the 90s when the cohort of cultural writers, culture critics, was just amazing. With Greg Tate at the top of the pantheon, but so many amazing writers in every field. Cindy Carr writing about arts, Amy Taubin writing about film, M. Mark running the literary supplement, Stacey Durasmo writing about literature, Lisa Kennedy writing her work on film, Lisa Jones, just the greatest writers. And so that helped me see what I was doing a little more clearly.
Music, as we said, is so personal. And you as a critic, do you ever worry about, bruising someone's bubble, if not bursting it?
Well, I definitely, after I published my first book in 2000, I experienced the pain of getting mixed reviews as part of my process of bringing this book out. And that made me acutely aware of the effect of criticism on people. I kind of had to work through that, I really realized that wow, that's a person creating work that I'm writing about. So I've never been that comfortable with just brutally mean writing. It's just not my thing. but at the same time, I think, just as I've had to learn how to take criticism, it's part of the process, and I don't think we can or should shield anyone from our judgments and our opinions. I mean, we have to have that confidence.
Yeah, that first definition line of critic always says someone that's like searching for negativity in a way, but there are other aspects to the word.
Oh, absolutely. I never thought of criticism as about having knives out, as it were, for myself. I always have been more of an enthusiast and also a contextualizer. At NPR, I guess we call it explainers, being an explainer, kind of helping people understand the historical context of music, the emotional context of music, the aesthetics of music. That's more what I'm about. And I think in this era, when music is instantly available, the consumer guide aspect is still useful because we need someone to help us figure out how to wade through this massive amount of music. But I also think, who am I to tell someone if they love or hate the new Billie Eilish record? They can listen for themselves. I can just provide some context, a way to listen more than should you listen.
Sure.
So I think we live in such a strange time right now for critics because we have this constant potential back and forth with artists via social media, and I don't know if that's good or bad for criticism, because on the one hand, I don't. Did you ever see that movie Ratatouille? You probably saw it.
Yeah.
So you know how it has that critic, the restaurant critic in that movie that everyone hates, and he's like this shriveled up man, and he lives to, make people miserable and destroy their restaurants or whatever. That's not a healthy image of what a critic should be either. I don't think a total jerk is what a critic should be. But on the other hand, we are human beings, and we can be affected by praise from others or criticism from others. So I don't think it's that healthy I think it's absolutely imperative to kind of try to keep the artist's voice out of your head, the artist's voice about your work out of your head.
Right.
When you're working, as tempting as it is to enjoy the embrace when you say something nice.
So how do you think this applies to Nashville?
Well, in a city like Nashville, I think it's all laid bare in that it's a small town, it's a company town in many ways. Similar to how LA is for film, obviously, or New York is for publishing. And I think it's really evident how everyone has a role to play in the health of the music that's made in this town, and that finds its life and its greatest audiences in this town. So I think it's a great place to think about exactly how does a critic serve multiple roles, the role of discovery, the role of supporting artists, as well as the role of, saying, well, this thing you created maybe isn't up to the same quality, or, it's not as effective as that thing you created. I mean, I don't shy away from supporting, celebrating, and enthusing about artists, especially younger artists or artists who don't have huge audiences, artists I believe in, because they need it,
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with unabashedly expressing your love of certain artists.
You know what, though? You just said something. You do have power.
Well,
And
that's
powers.
very...
You have power over certain people getting maybe cred.
Well, and that's something that that I have to be careful about and kind of constantly check myself about,
Yeah.
because I think that's something that can be very seductive, and you just have to be aware of how some people might be buttering you up, as they say,
Sure.
or how sometimes these connections that feel personal are also instrumental for everyone involved, and that definitely creates material to talk about with your therapist if you have one. But it is something that I think we all need to be aware of.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Harouche and Andrea Tudhope. Original music by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. We do a little thing at the end here. In our pretty pink fishbowl there are questions posed by past guests.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So choose one, and then we'll challenge you to ask one for someone in the future.
Okay. I'll pick this
Dig
one.
deep.
Okay. From Elishaba Morozic. What is one thing that you can do for free for your community?
For your community that would have an impact. Just one thing that you can do for free that would have an impact.
Well, in the spirit of music and raising our voices together, I'm going to say actually just talking with and engaging with your neighbors, I think, is so important. And on the music tip, why I say that's relevant is because so many of my neighbors where I live in Inglewood are actually musicians or work in the music world. And just walking my little dog on the street, I've met so many people who are part of my world who I didn't even know were my neighbors, you know? But it's important on that level just to know the stories of everyone around you. But also, we need each other. I'm a strong believer in mutual aid. And seeing people like Darren Bradbury and what he's doing up in Madison with homeless people, with unhoused people, that's really about acknowledging everyone who is your neighbors as well.